When my son Marcus called me a burden and hung up on me while I was recovering from pneumonia, he had no idea I was sitting on $4.2 million in offshore accounts. He thought I was just another broke old woman clinging to his charity. By the time I was done with him, he'd learn exactly how expensive it is to underestimate your mother. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against the windows of my small apartment in Millfield Heights like angry fingers tapping on glass. I pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around my shoulders, feeling the familiar ache in my chest that had nothing to do with the pneumonia I'd just recovered from. The doctor's words still echoed in my mind from 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Blackwell, at 72, pneumonia is serious business. You'll need someone to help you during recovery. Someone to help me. That was a joke. My apartment felt smaller than ever that gray February morning. The faded floral wallpaper seemed to close in on me, and the ancient radiator wheezed like it was struggling to breathe, much like I had been just weeks before. The place looked exactly like what my son Marcus expected, the humble dwelling of a woman living on Social Security, scraping by month to month. If only he knew the truth. The truth was hidden in plain sight, really. Scattered around my modest living room were seemingly worthless items that told a different story to anyone who knew how to look. The cheap ceramic vase on my coffee table was actually a 15th-century Ming piece worth $180,000. The thrift store painting above my couch was an original Monet study I'd acquired through private channels in Switzerland. Even the costume jewelry I wore was comprised of conflict-free diamonds and rare gemstones worth more than most people's houses. But Marcus saw none of it. He saw what he wanted to see. A burden. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers, still weak from the illness that had knocked me flat for 2 weeks. The pneumonia had been brutal, leaving me gasping for air and barely able to get out of bed. I'd called Marcus 4 times during the worst of it. 4 times I'd reached out to my only child, hoping for even a brief visit or a grocery run. 4 times he'd been too busy. "Mom, I'm swamped at the office," he'd said during the first call, his voice distant and distracted. Marcus worked as a regional sales manager for Pinnacle Industries in downtown Crescent City, about 40 minutes from my apartment, maybe this weekend. The weekend came and went. No Marcus. "Things are crazy with the Henderson account," he'd explained during the second call. "Rain check." By the third call, his irritation was obvious. "Mom, can't you just order groceries online? It's 2024. Everything delivers now." The fourth call never got past voicemail. So I'd suffered alone, surviving on crackers and canned soup, too weak to drive to the pharmacy for my antibiotics, too proud to call anyone else. My neighbor Mrs. Chen had checked on me once, bringing homemade soup that tasted like heaven. But I couldn't burden her with my problems. She had her own family to worry about. Marcus didn't know that during those dark, feverish nights, I'd lain in bed thinking about the real reason I lived so modestly. The real reason I clipped coupons and shopped at discount stores and wore the same coat I'd had for 8 years. 25 years ago, my late husband Victor and I had made some very smart investments. Victor, God rest his soul, had been a financial genius with connections in international markets that most people could only dream of. When tech stocks exploded in the late 90s, we'd gotten in early. When the cryptocurrency boom happened, we'd positioned ourselves perfectly. When certain overseas opportunities arose, completely legal but requiring discretion, we'd moved our wealth to private banks in Geneva, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore. The money had grown exponentially over the decades. What started as a few $100,000 had mushroomed into millions through careful management and Victor's brilliant investment strategies. When he passed away 5 years ago, he left me detailed instructions on how to access everything, along with contact information for our Swiss banker Klaus Richter at Helvetia Private Wealth Management. But I'd kept living like I was poor, partly out of habit, partly out of caution, and partly because I wanted to see who my son really was when he thought I had nothing to offer him. Turned out I was right to be cautious. I looked at my phone now, Marcus's contact photo staring back at me. He was 34 years old, with my late husband's strong jaw and my own stubborn streak. He lived in an upscale townhouse in Riverside Meadows with his wife Stephanie and their twin boys, Connor and Blake. 8-year-old boys who barely knew their grandmother because their parents were always too busy for visits. My chest tightened with more than just pneumonia after effects. When had my relationship with my son become so transactional? When had I become something to manage rather than someone to love? I thought about the envelope hidden in my bedroom closet behind a false panel Victor had installed years ago. Inside were account numbers, access codes, and the business card for Klaus Richter. One phone call to Geneva, and I could have more money in my checking account than Marcus made in 5 years. But I'd never needed to make that call. I'd lived comfortably on Victor's pension and my Social Security, saving every penny of our legitimate domestic accounts while the offshore money continued to grow untouched. It was my insurance policy, my safety net, my secret weapon, and Marcus had no idea it existed. I pressed his number and waited as it rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Just as I expected it to go to voicemail again, he picked up. "What is it, Mom?" His voice was sharp, impatient. I could hear the sounds of his office in the background, phones ringing, people talking, the general buzz of a busy workplace. "Marcus, I'm still not feeling well from the pneumonia. I was wondering if you could, Mom." He cut me off, his tone shifting from impatient to something harder, something that made my blood run cold. "I need to be honest with you about something." I waited, my heart starting to pound. "You can't keep calling me every time you have a sniffle or need something from the store. I have a family now, responsibilities. Stephanie and I are talking about maybe it's time you looked into some kind of assisted living situation." The words hit me like a physical blow. Assisted living? "Marcus, I just had pneumonia. I'm not—" "You're 72, Mom. You live alone in that old building. What if something serious happens? What if you fall and can't get up? I can't drop everything every time you need help. It's not fair to my family." "I'm your family too," I whispered. "You know what I mean." His voice was getting sharper now, more frustrated. "Look, I'll be straight with you. You're becoming a burden." "There," I said it. "And burdens need to be managed properly." The line went quiet except for my ragged breathing. "Did you just call me a burden?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "If the shoe fits, Mom. I'm sorry, but someone had to say it. You can't take care of yourself anymore. And you can't expect me to put my life on hold every time you need something. I have real responsibilities." Then he hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, the word burden echoing in my mind like a curse. My own son, my only child, the boy I'd raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally. He thought I was a burden. I sat there in my small apartment, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of hidden treasures, while my son's words carved themselves into my heart. But as the shock began to fade, something else took its place. Something cold, something calculating, something that felt a lot like the steel in Victor's voice when he used to negotiate with Swiss bankers. Marcus wanted to manage his burden? Fine. I'd show him exactly how much this particular burden was worth, and then we'd see who was really dependent on whom. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence in my apartment felt suffocating after Marcus hung up. I sat there holding the phone, the word burden still ringing in my ears like a funeral bell. My hands were shaking, not from the pneumonia weakness this time but from pure shock. 34 years. 34 years since I'd held that tiny red-faced baby in the maternity ward of St. Catherine's Hospital in Crescent City. 34 years since I'd counted his perfect little fingers and toes and promised him I'd always be there, always protect him, always love him no matter what, and this is what it had come to. I forced myself to stand up, my legs still unsteady from weeks of illness, and walked to the kitchen. The small space felt even more cramped than usual, with its outdated appliances and chipped linoleum floor. To anyone looking in from the outside, it screamed poverty. Old woman, fixed income, scraping by. But my eyes fell on the seemingly ordinary coffee mug sitting on the counter, a souvenir from a trip to Prague. What Marcus didn't know was that it wasn't a tourist trinket. It was Royal Bohemian crystal from 1887, worth $40,000. I'd bought it during a discreet auction in Vienna 3 years ago, after Victor passed away. Everything in my life was like that mug, valuable beyond imagination, hidden in plain sight. I opened the refrigerator and stared at its nearly empty shelves, a half-empty carton of milk that was probably going bad, some leftover soup Mrs. Chen had brought me, a few eggs. The sight should have depressed me, but instead, it made me think about the irony of it all. Last month alone, my offshore investments had generated more in interest than Marcus made in 6 months at Pinnacle Industries. While he worried about his mortgage payments and his kids' private school tuition, my Swiss accounts had quietly grown by another $180,000. I closed the refrigerator and walked back to the living room, each step a reminder of how weak I still felt. The pneumonia had knocked me down harder than I'd expected, and at 72, recovery wasn't what it used to be. But Marcus didn't care about that. He saw weakness and immediately labeled it as inconvenience. A burden. I sank back into my worn armchair, another deception. The chair looked like something from a thrift store, but it was actually a custom piece crafted by Alessandro Mendini, worth more than most people's cars. Victor had special ordered it through a private dealer in Milan. We'd both laughed about how no one would ever suspect its true value. Victor. God, how I missed him right now. He would have known exactly what to do about Marcus. Victor had always been able to read people like balance sheets, could spot selfishness and greed from a mile away. He'd warned me about this, in his gentle way. Eleanor, he'd said during one of our last conversations before the cancer took him, when I'm gone you'll see people's true colors. Money changes everything, even family, especially family. I'd thought he was being pessimistic. Marcus was our son, he loved us, he'd grown up in a happy home, went to good schools, had everything he needed. Sure, we'd lived modestly, never flaunting our wealth, but we'd given him love, support, opportunities. But Victor had been right. After he died, Marcus's visits became less frequent, the phone calls grew shorter, and slowly, gradually, I realized that his interest in me was directly proportional to what he thought I could do for him. The memories came flooding back now, each one a small knife twist in my heart. 3 years ago, when Marcus and Stephanie were buying their townhouse in Riverside Meadows, he'd asked for help with the down payment. "It's just temporary, Mom. We'll pay you back once my next promotion comes through." I'd given him $50,000 from my domestic savings account. The promotion came through 6 months later, but the payback never did. When I'd gently mentioned it, he'd gotten defensive. "Mom, you know we're struggling with the twins' expenses. Besides, isn't this what family does for each other?" 2 years ago, when Stephanie wanted to remodel their kitchen, suddenly I was getting phone calls again. "You know how Steph gets about the house, Mom. She's been so stressed about that old kitchen. If you could help us out." Another $30,000, another promise to pay me back, another excuse when the time came. Last year, when the twins needed new bikes, new clothes, enrollment in that expensive summer camp at Lake Windermere, guess who got the call? Each time, I'd helped. Not because I couldn't afford it. The amounts were pocket change compared to my real wealth. I'd helped because I thought this was what loving families did. I thought I was investing in my relationship with my son and grandchildren. I thought wrong. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the pattern I could see so clearly now. Marcus only called when he needed something. The conversations were always the same. Small talk for about 30 seconds, then the real reason for the call. After he got what he wanted, the calls would stop until the next financial crisis, and I'd enabled it. I'd been so desperate to maintain a connection with him that I'd let myself become his personal ATM. I'd told myself it was love, but really, it was fear. Fear of losing the only family I had left. But today, when I'd really needed him, when I was genuinely sick and struggling, suddenly I was a burden. I reached for the photo on the side table next to my chair. It was from Connor and Blake's 8th birthday party last month. Marcus had sent it via text with a brief "kids say hi." I wasn't invited to the party, of course. Too much trouble to arrange, too much hassle for Stephanie to plan around. In the photo, the twins were grinning in front of an elaborate superhero-themed party setup. Professional decorations, expensive entertainment, catered food. I'd helped pay for it all with my contribution to their tight budget. Looking at their innocent faces now, I felt my heart breaking all over again. Those boys barely knew me. When was the last time I'd actually spent time with them? Really spent time, not just a hurried hello when Marcus needed something. It had been months, maybe longer. I was their grandmother, and I was a stranger to them because their father found me inconvenient. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe Marcus was calling back to apologize, to take back those awful words. But it wasn't Marcus. It was Stephanie. "Hi, Eleanor. Hope you're feeling better. Quick question. Do you know any good deals on Florida vacation rentals? We're thinking of taking the boys to Disney World for spring break. Let me know." I stared at the message, the fake cheerfulness jumping off the screen like a slap in the face. Not a word about the fact that her husband had just called me a burden. Not a question about my health or recovery, just another request for help, disguised as casual conversation. They wanted me to help plan and probably pay for their Disney vacation while Marcus was out there telling people I was too much trouble to take care of. I set the phone down and walked to my bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. At the back of my closet, behind the hanging clothes that had seen better days, was the false panel Victor had installed years ago. My fingers found the hidden latch, and the small door swung open. Inside was a manila envelope, thick with documents, bank statements from Helvetia Private Wealth Management in Geneva, account summaries from Cayman National Trust, investment portfolios from Singapore International Banking. I pulled out the most recent statement from Klaus Richter. The numbers were almost abstract in their enormity. $4,247, $893 buying $67 in the primary Geneva account alone. That didn't include the Cayman holdings, the Singapore investments, or the various precious metals and art pieces stored in secure facilities around the world. Victor's voice seemed to whisper in my ear. Money is power, Eleanor, but the real power is in knowing when to use it. I'd never needed to use it before. I'd been content to live quietly, modestly, letting the money grow while I maintained my simple life, but Marcus had just changed all of that. He thought I was a burden who needed to be managed. He thought I was a helpless old woman with no options. He thought he held all the cards in our relationship. I folded the bank statement carefully and put it back in the envelope. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The weakness I'd felt from the pneumonia seemed to be fading, replaced by something else. Something cold and calculating and absolutely certain. Marcus wanted to treat me like a burden? Fine, but burdens have a way of becoming very expensive when you're not careful with them, and my son was about to learn exactly how much his callousness was going to cost him. I spent the next 2 days in a strange state of calm that felt almost otherworldly. The pneumonia symptoms were finally starting to fade, but something else had taken their place, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was as if Marcus's cruel words had burned away a fog I didn't even realize had been clouding my judgment. On Thursday morning, I made myself a proper breakfast for the first time since getting sick. Real eggs, not the crackers and soup I'd been surviving on. As I sat at my small kitchen table, I found myself really looking at my surroundings with new eyes. The cheap ceramic salt and pepper shakers on the table were actually Meissen porcelain from 1920, worth $15,000. The garage sale painting hanging above the stove was a lesser-known work by Mary Cassatt that Victor had acquired through private channels, worth roughly $300,000. Even the discount store tablecloth was hand-woven silk from a monastery in Tibet, purchased during one of our trips overseas. My entire life was a carefully constructed illusion, and I was the only one who knew the truth. I was finishing my coffee when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something about it looked familiar. I answered hesitantly. Mrs. Blackwell? This is Sandra Mitchell from Sunrise Assisted Living in Willowbrook. Your son Marcus contacted us yesterday about scheduling a tour for you. My blood went cold. I'm sorry. He explained that you've been having some health issues and that the family is exploring care options. We have a lovely facility here, very well appointed. Could we schedule a time for you to visit? Perhaps this weekend? I gripped the phone tighter. I never asked anyone to contact assisted living facilities. There was a pause. Oh, well, your son seemed quite concerned about your welfare. He mentioned that you live alone and recently had pneumonia. He felt it would be wise to explore alternatives before any emergencies arise. Marcus had actually done it. Less than 48 hours after calling me a burden, he was already making arrangements to ship me off somewhere. He wasn't even pretending to include me in the decision. I appreciate you calling, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me, but I won't be needing your services. Of course, Mrs. Blackwell, but perhaps you'd like our brochure anyway? Just in case you change your mind. We could mail it to you, or your son could pick one up when he comes in tomorrow. He's coming in tomorrow? Yes, for his appointment at 2 p.m. He wanted to tour the facilities himself first, to make sure they'd be suitable for you. After I hung up, I sat there staring at the phone. Marcus was touring assisted living facilities. Without telling me, without asking me, he'd made the decision that I was too much trouble to deal with, and now he was shopping around for somewhere to dump me. The audacity was breathtaking. I walked to my bedroom and opened the false panel again, pulling out Klaus Richter's business card. It was thick, expensive cardstock with elegant Swiss typography. Helvetia Private Wealth Management, Geneva. Below that, in smaller text, discretion, excellence, legacy. I'd never called Klaus directly, All of our interactions had gone through Victor when he was alive, and since his death, Klaus had sent quarterly reports through encrypted email and secure courier. But Victor had assured me that if I ever needed anything, Klaus would be available immediately. It was time to test that promise. I dialed the international number, and after 2 rings, a polished voice answered in accented English. Helvetia Private Wealth Management, Klaus Richter speaking. Mr. Richter, this is Eleanor Blackwell, Victor Blackwell's widow. Mrs. Blackwell, his tone immediately warmed. How wonderful to hear from you. I hope you are well. How may I assist you today? I need to make some changes to my accounts, and I need to move quickly. Of course. Are you in a secure location to discuss details? I looked around my small apartment. Yes, I'm alone. Excellent. What kind of changes are we discussing? I took a deep breath. I want to transfer $500,000 to my domestic checking account at First National Bank of Crescent City. I want it done today if possible. There was a brief pause. Certainly, that can be arranged. The transfer will show as coming from our consulting fee account as usual to maintain privacy. May I ask if this is for a specific purpose, only so I can ensure we structure it properly? Let's call it a family investment, I said dryly. Understood. The transfer will be completed within the hour. Is there anything else? Yes, I want you to prepare documentation showing my full asset portfolio. Everything. All accounts, all holdings, all investments. I want it printed on official letterhead and sent via overnight courier to my address. Mrs. Blackwell, are you certain? Your husband was very specific about maintaining discretion regarding the full scope of your holdings. Victor's gone, Mr. Richter, and circumstances have changed dramatically. I see. Very well. You'll have complete documentation by tomorrow afternoon. Anything else I can do for you? Actually, yes. I want to explore some options for charitable giving, large-scale charitable giving. Can you recommend some reputable organizations that handle significant donations? Of course, we work with several excellent foundations: the International Children's Education Fund, the Global Medical Relief Alliance, the Worldwide Environmental Protection Initiative, all highly rated, completely transparent organizations. How significant are we discussing? I smiled for the first time in days. Let's say 7 figures, potentially 8. Klaus was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Blackwell, are you quite certain about this direction? These are very substantial changes to your financial strategy. I've never been more certain about anything in my life. After hanging up with Klaus, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time since Victor died, I was taking control of my own financial destiny instead of just letting the money sit and grow. Within an hour, my phone buzzed with a text from my bank. Your account has received a deposit of $500,000. Current balance, $523,847. I stared at the number. Yesterday, Marcus thought I was a penniless burden living on Social Security. Today, I had more money in my checking account than he'd see in a decade. But the money was just the beginning. I spent the rest of the day making calls. First to Dr. Patricia Hendricks, my physician, requesting copies of all my medical records and a written statement of my mental competency and physical independence. She was surprised by the request but agreed to have everything ready by Friday. Next, I called my neighbor Mrs. Chen. Helen, I need a favor. Could you take some photographs of my apartment today? I want documentation of how I'm living, for personal reasons. Of course, Eleanor. Is everything all right? Everything's about to be much better. Then I called Riverside Meadows Property Management, the company that handled rentals in Marcus's upscale neighborhood. I'm interested in properties in your portfolio. Could someone show me what's available this weekend? Money is no object. The agent was practically purring by the end of the call. My final call was to Margaret Holmes, the best private investigator in Crescent City. Victor had used her services years ago for some business dealings, and she was known for her discretion and thoroughness. Margaret, this is Eleanor Blackwell. I need comprehensive background checks on 2 people, and I need surveillance photographs. When can we meet? I have an opening tomorrow morning. What are we looking for? Financial records, lifestyle documentation, and evidence of character. My son thinks he knows everything about me, but it turns out I don't know nearly enough about him. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the weakness I'd felt from the pneumonia was completely gone. In its place was an energy I hadn't experienced in years. It was the energy of a woman who had finally decided to stop hiding. Marcus wanted to manage his burden. Tomorrow he'd start learning exactly what kind of burden he'd been dealing with all along. And by the time I was finished, he'd understand that some burdens are too expensive to manage and too dangerous to underestimate. The game was about to begin, and I held all the cards. He just didn't know it yet. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp February air that made everything feel sharp and clear. I'd slept better than I had in weeks, and for the first time since the pneumonia, I felt genuinely strong. There's something powerful about having a plan, about knowing you're about to take control of a situation that's been controlling you. My first appointment was with Dr. Patricia Hendricks at 9 a.m. Her office in the Crescent City Medical Plaza had always felt sterile and intimidating. But today I walked in with confidence I hadn't felt in years. Dr. Hendricks, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with silver hair and kind eyes, greeted me in her office. "Eleanor, you look remarkably better than when I saw you last week. The pneumonia seems to have cleared up nicely." She handed me a thick manila envelope. "Here are the medical records you requested, along with a detailed report on your current health status. I have to ask, though, is everything all right? This is an unusual request." I opened the envelope and scanned the documents. Everything was there: my complete medical history, recent test results, and most importantly, a signed statement declaring me mentally competent and physically independent, with no cognitive impairment or conditions requiring assisted care. "Let's just say I want to make sure my medical situation is clearly documented," I said. "Dr. Hendricks, in your professional opinion, do I require any form of assisted living or specialized care?" She looked puzzled. "Absolutely not. You're remarkably healthy for 72. The pneumonia was serious, but you've recovered fully. You're mentally sharp, physically capable, and completely independent. Why would you ask such a thing?" "Someone has suggested otherwise, and I want medical proof that they're wrong." Her expression hardened. "Eleanor, if someone is questioning your competency or trying to force you into care you don't need, that's a very serious matter. Are you being pressured by family members?" "Not pressured, just underestimated." I left her office with the documentation tucked securely in my purse. Strike one against Marcus's narrative that I was a helpless old woman who couldn't take care of herself. My next stop was the office of Margaret Holmes, private investigator. Her building was downtown, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and industrial lighting that screamed expensive discretion. Margaret herself was exactly what you'd expect from someone in her profession: sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed, and clearly someone who missed nothing. "Mrs. Blackwell, it's been a while since your husband and I worked together. Victor was a smart man. I was sorry to hear about his passing." She gestured to a leather chair across from her desk. "Now what can I do for you?" I pulled out 2 photographs, one of Marcus and one of Stephanie, along with their full names, addresses, and workplaces. "I need comprehensive background checks on both of them. Financial records, credit reports, spending patterns, debt levels, employment history. Everything." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "These are family members, my son and daughter-in-law, and before you ask, yes, I have my reasons. I don't judge, Mrs. Blackwell, I just gather information." "What's the timeline?" "As quickly as possible. Money is no object." She quoted a fee that would have shocked most people. I pulled out my checkbook, the one connected to my newly flushed domestic account, and wrote the check without hesitation. Margaret's eyes widened slightly when she saw the amount didn't faze me. "I'll also need surveillance photos," I continued. "I want documentation of their lifestyle, their spending habits, where they go, what they do, particularly anything that suggests they're living beyond their means." "Understood. Anything else?" "Yes. I want you to research Pinnacle Industries, where my son works. I want to know about their employee policies, their code of conduct, anything that might be relevant if someone were to question an employee's character or judgment." Margaret made notes on her pad. "Mrs. Blackwell, this is quite extensive. Are you planning some kind of legal action?" "I'm planning to protect myself, and sometimes the best defense is having all the facts." After leaving Margaret's office, I drove to the Riverside Meadows sales office. The property manager, a polished woman named Ashley Crawford, greeted me with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for serious buyers with serious money. "Mrs. Blackwell, I'm so excited to show you our available properties. When you mentioned money was no object, I pulled together our premium listings." She led me through 3 different townhouses, each more luxurious than the last. The third one made me pause. It was just 2 streets over from Marcus and Stephanie's house, with a direct view of their backyard from the upstairs windows. "This one," I said. "What's the asking price?" $485,000. It's one of our most desirable units, completely renovated last year. Granite countertops, hardwood floors, premium appliances. I'll take it. Ashley blinked. Don't you want to think about it? Discuss it with family? Get a home inspection? No need. I can pay cash. How quickly can we close? Cash. Ashley's voice went up an octave. Well, if you can provide proof of funds, we could potentially close within 2 weeks. I pulled out my phone and showed her my bank balance. Her jaw actually dropped. I'll have the paperwork ready by Monday, she said faintly. My final stop of the day was Millfield Heights Elementary, where Connor and Blake attended school. I'd never been there before, another casualty of Marcus's busy schedule, but I'd looked up the address online. I parked across the street and waited for the school day to end. At 3:15, children began streaming out of the building, and I spotted my grandsons immediately. They had Marcus's dark hair and my late husband's strong chin. 8 years old and already growing so fast, they climbed into a silver SUV where Stephanie was waiting. Even from a distance, I could see her checking her phone, barely acknowledging the boys as they got in. No hugs, no questions about their day, just an impatient gesture to hurry up. I followed them at a safe distance, my heart aching as I watched my own grandchildren live their lives completely separate from mine. They went to the Crescent City Country Club, where Stephanie dropped them off at what appeared to be tennis lessons. Private tennis lessons, I noted, at one of the most expensive clubs in the city. While the boys were in their lesson, Stephanie met up with 3 other women at the club's cafe. I parked where I could observe through my telephoto lens, another skill Victor had taught me during our travels, for photographing art and investments. The women were clearly part of Stephanie's social circle, all perfectly coiffed and carrying designer handbags. They ordered expensive cocktails despite it being barely 4 p.m., and I watched Stephanie charge everything to her membership account without hesitation. I took photos of everything: the country club, the tennis lessons, the expensive lunch, the casual spending that suggested a family with unlimited resources. But I knew the truth about Marcus's salary. I'd helped with their mortgage because they claimed to be struggling financially. Yet here was Stephanie spending more on one afternoon than I typically spent in a month. On my drive home, I stopped at the Sunrise Assisted Living facility in Willowbrook. I wanted to see where Marcus thought I belonged. The place was depressing. Despite the cheerful brochures and welcoming lobby, it had that institutional smell that no amount of air freshener could mask. The residents I saw looked vacant, medicated, forgotten, people whose families had decided they were too much trouble to deal with. The tour coordinator, a bubbly young woman named Jennifer, showed me around enthusiastically. "Your son spoke so highly of you," she gushed. "He seems very concerned about your welfare. It's wonderful when families are so involved in the decision-making process." "Involved," I repeated. "That's one way to put it." "He mentioned you'd been having some health issues and that living alone was becoming challenging. We specialize in helping people maintain their independence while having support available when needed." I looked around at the small, sterile rooms, the communal dining area with its bland institutional food, the activity room where a few residents sat staring at a television. This was Marcus's solution for his burden problem. "What are the visiting hours?" I asked. "Oh, very flexible. Family can visit any time between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Some families visit every day, others weekly. It really depends on everyone's schedule." I almost laughed. Marcus couldn't be bothered to check on me when I had pneumonia and was living independently. Did he really think he'd be making regular visits once I was locked away in this place? That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by evidence of my day's work. Medical records proving my competency. A private investigator gathering intelligence. A new house purchase that would put me right in Marcus's neighborhood. Photos of my grandchildren living a lifestyle funded partly by money they thought I didn't have. But the most important thing I'd gained that day was clarity. I'd seen exactly what Marcus's plan for me looked like, and I'd seen exactly how my family was really living when they thought I wasn't watching. The pneumonia had been a test, and Marcus had failed it spectacularly. Instead of showing up for his mother when she needed help, he'd decided she was too much trouble and started shopping for a place to warehouse her. Tomorrow, Klaus's overnight package would arrive with documentation of my real financial situation. The private investigator would begin her work, and I would start the process of showing my son exactly what happened when you underestimated someone who had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Marcus thought he was managing a burden. He was about to discover he'd been playing chess with someone who'd been thinking 12 moves ahead while he was still learning the rules. The game was accelerating, and I was ready for the next phase. Saturday morning brought Klaus Richter's overnight package, delivered by a courier who required 2 forms of identification and a signature before handing over the thick leather-bound portfolio. I'd been waiting by the window since 8 a.m., watching for the distinctive Swiss diplomatic pouch that would contain the documentation of my real net worth. The weight of the portfolio surprised me. Inside were pristine documents printed on heavy letterhead, each page bearing the elegant logo of Helvetia Private Wealth Management. Account summaries, investment portfolios, asset valuations, and most importantly, a comprehensive wealth statement that showed my total liquid assets at $4,247,893.67, with additional holdings in precious metals, art, and real estate, bringing the grand total to just over $6.8 million. I spread the documents across my kitchen table, each page representing decades of careful planning by Victor and me. Here was proof of the tech stock purchases from 1998 that had grown 3,000%. Here were the cryptocurrency investments from 2011 that had exploded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Here were the art acquisitions, the precious metals, the carefully diversified international holdings that had turned us into millionaires several times over. And Marcus had no idea any of it existed. As I was reviewing the documents, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Margaret Holmes. "Mrs. Blackwell, I have some preliminary findings you'll want to hear. Can you come in this afternoon? I'll be there at 2 p.m. Margaret's office felt different this time, more like a war room than a business meeting. She had files spread across her desk, photographs pinned to a bulletin board, and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd found something significant. "Your son and daughter-in-law are interesting people," she began without preamble. "Let's start with the financials. Marcus makes $78,000 annually at Pinnacle Industries. Stephanie doesn't work outside the home. Their mortgage payment is $2,400 per month, plus property taxes, insurance, utilities. The twins' private school costs $18,000 per year each." She handed me a spreadsheet. Based on their known income and fixed expenses, they should be living paycheck to paycheck. But here's where it gets interesting. Margaret pulled out a stack of photographs, credit card statements, bank records, receipts. They're spending like they make 3 times what Marcus actually earns. Country club membership, $3,000 annually. The boys' tennis lessons, $200 per week each. Stephanie's car lease, $650 per month for a BMW X5. Marcus drives a leased Mercedes, $580 per month. I studied the numbers, feeling my anger build with each line item. Vacation spending, Margaret continued, is particularly enlightening. Last year alone, a week in Aspen, a long weekend in Napa Valley, and that Disney trip Stephanie mentioned in her text to you. Total vacation spending, $47,000. $47,000, I repeated slowly. In 1 year. That's more than half of Marcus's gross salary. Mrs. Blackwell, these people are living completely beyond their means. The question is, where's the money coming from? Margaret opened another file. I tracked down some interesting information. Over the past 3 years, they've received regular cash deposits that don't correspond to any employment income. Deposits of $5,000 here, $10,000 there, $50,000 for the house down payment, $30,000 last spring. Those are the amounts I gave them, I said quietly. Exactly. But here's the thing. They're not treating these as loans, they're treating them as regular income. I found text messages between Marcus and Stephanie where they refer to Mom's monthly contribution and discuss how much to ask for next time. The blood drained from my face. They've been planning this. The requests for money weren't emergencies, they were calculated. It gets worse. Margaret pulled out more photographs. Stephanie belongs to a book club that meets monthly at the Crescent City Country Club. I managed to get some audio from their last meeting. She played a recording on her phone. Stephanie's voice was clear and unmistakable. Honestly, it's like having our own personal bank. Marcus just mentions some expense, acts all stressed about money, and she writes a check. Last month I wanted new furniture for the living room, so we told her Connor needed special tutoring. Boom, $15,000. Another voice. Doesn't she ever ask for proof, like receipts or something? Stephanie's laugh was sharp and ugly. Are you kidding? She's so desperate to stay connected to us. She'd probably pay our mortgage forever if we asked nicely enough. Which, by the way, she basically has been. I felt sick. Margaret paused the recording and looked at me with something approaching sympathy. There's more, Mrs. Blackwell. They've been discussing your future quite extensively." She played another segment. This time it was Marcus's voice, clearly recorded during a phone call. "The assisted living place looks perfect. Mom will fight it at first, but once she's there, it's not like she can leave. We'll have power of attorney, and then we can really streamline things. No more begging for money every month. We'll just manage her finances directly." "Power of attorney?" I whispered. "They've already consulted with a lawyer about having you declared incompetent based on your recent illness and living situation. The plan is to get you into assisted living, then argue that you're unable to manage your own affairs." Margaret pulled out legal documents. "Here's the petition they've already drafted. It cites your pneumonia, your age, your isolated living conditions, and claims you've been making irrational financial decisions, meaning the money you've been giving them." The irony was staggering. They were planning to use my generosity as evidence of my incompetence. "Mrs. Blackwell, there's something else you need to know. They think you're essentially broke." "What?" "I found more recordings. They believe you're living on Social Security and maybe a small pension from your husband. They think the money you've been giving them is depleting your life savings, and they're actually worried you'll run out soon." Margaret showed me another transcript. "Mom can't keep this up forever. She's probably spending her emergency fund on us. We need to get control of her finances before she spends herself into poverty." I stared at the documents, trying to process the complete reversal of reality. Marcus wasn't just planning to steal from me. He thought he was rescuing me from my own financial recklessness. "They genuinely believe they're being responsible," Margaret continued. "In their minds, you're an elderly woman squandering her limited resources on children who should be self-sufficient. They think taking control of your money will actually protect you. While they live like millionaires on my life savings," I said bitterly. "Exactly. Mrs. Blackwell, I have to ask, are you planning to press charges? This is fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy. You have enough evidence here to put them both in prison." I was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Prison would be satisfying, but it wouldn't solve the real problem. The real problem was that my son had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who saw his mother as nothing more than a resource to be managed and eventually discarded. "Not yet," I said finally. "I want them to make the first move. Let them file their incompetency petition. Let them try to force me into assisted living. I want to see exactly how far they're willing to go." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "That's risky. If a judge grants their petition, you could lose all control over your finances." I smiled, thinking about the Swiss bank statement sitting on my kitchen table. "Margaret, they don't even know what my finances are. They're planning to control assets they've never seen and can't imagine. You have a plan. I'm beginning to. But first I want them to commit fully to this course of action. I want them to file legal papers, make their accusations public, burn every bridge they have with me. Because once they do that, there's no going back." I stood up and gathered the files Margaret had given me. "Keep investigating. I want to know every detail of their spending, every lie they've told, every plan they've made, and I want you to start documenting my daily activities." "Your activities?" "I want proof that I'm living independently, managing my own affairs, making rational decisions. When this goes to court, and it will go to court, I want to demonstrate exactly how competent I really am." Margaret nodded. "I'll have a full dossier ready within the week." As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The game was much bigger than I'd realized. Marcus wasn't just dismissing me as a burden, he was actively planning to take control of my life and finances. He thought he was saving me from myself while positioning himself to inherit whatever was left. The beautiful irony was that he had no idea what he was really trying to inherit. He was planning to control millions of dollars that he didn't know existed, while I sat quietly in my modest apartment, holding documentation of wealth beyond his wildest dreams. Marcus wanted to play financial guardian to his incompetent mother. Perfect. Let him file his papers, let him make his case in court. Let him stand in front of a judge and explain why Eleanor Blackwell, the broke old woman living on Social Security, needed to have her finances managed by her responsible son. And then I'd show them all exactly what those finances actually looked like. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for Marcus to walk into it. The call came on Wednesday morning, exactly 1 week after Marcus had called me a burden. I was in my new townhouse in Riverside Meadows, directing the furniture delivery team as they arranged the pieces I'd purchased from Pemberton's Fine Furnishings, the most expensive furniture store in Crescent City. Each piece was carefully chosen not for comfort but for impact. When the time came for Marcus to see how his broke mother was living, I wanted every detail to tell a story. "Mom, we need to talk." Marcus's voice was tense, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Can you come over tonight? Around 7? "Of course, dear. Is everything all right? We'll discuss it when you get here." The line went dead, and I smiled. Margaret had warned me this was coming. Her surveillance team had observed Marcus and Stephanie meeting with a lawyer at Hartwell and Associates on Monday afternoon. They'd emerged looking pleased with themselves, carrying a thick folder of documents. It was showtime. I spent the afternoon preparing carefully. I dressed in my usual modest clothing, a simple cardigan that had seen better days, sensible shoes, the same handbag I'd carried for 8 years. To anyone looking, I was exactly what Marcus expected. An elderly woman of limited means, perhaps a bit confused, certainly not someone capable of making major financial decisions, but in that handbag was a portfolio that would change everything. I drove to Marcus's house in my old Honda Civic, the car I'd deliberately kept despite being able to afford any vehicle I wanted. The house looked exactly as it had when I'd helped with the down payment 3 years ago, perfectly maintained, expensively landscaped, every detail screaming upper-middle-class success. Success built on my money. Stephanie answered the door with a smile, so fake it looked like it had been painted on. "Eleanor, come in, come in. Marcus is in the living room." The house felt different this time. Knowing what I now knew about their finances, about their planning, about their secret recordings, every interaction felt like theater. They were performing concern while preparing to destroy me. Marcus stood as I entered the living room, but he didn't approach for his usual perfunctory hug. Instead, he gestured to the couch with the kind of gentle firmness you'd use with a confused child. "Mom, please sit down. Stephanie and I have been talking, and we're concerned about you." Concerned? I settled into the expensive leather couch I'd helped purchase. About what? Stephanie sat across from me, her hands folded in what was probably meant to be a compassionate pose. "Eleanor, we know the pneumonia was really hard on you, and we've been thinking about what happened when you were sick, how difficult it was for you to manage on your own." "I managed fine," I said quietly. "Did you?" Marcus's tone was sharper now. "Mom, you called me 4 times asking for help. You could barely get out of bed. What if something worse had happened? What if you'd fallen, or had a medical emergency?" "But I didn't fall, and I recovered fully." This time Stephanie interjected. "But Eleanor, you're 72 years old, these things are only going to get harder." Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mom, we've been doing some research. There are some excellent assisted living communities in the area, places where you'd have your independence but also have support when you need it." "I don't need support. You called us for help when you were sick," Marcus repeated. "You admitted you couldn't take care of yourself." "I asked my son to check on me when I had pneumonia. That's what families do for each other." Stephanie and Marcus exchanged a look that I was clearly meant to see. The look said, "She's not being rational." "Mom," Marcus said, his voice taking on that patient tone adults use with stubborn children, "we're also worried about your financial decisions lately." "Here it comes," I thought. "You've been very generous with us over the past few years," Stephanie said carefully. "More generous than you should be, given your situation." "My situation? Mom, you're living on Social Security and Dad's pension," Marcus said. "But you've given us over $100,000 in the past 3 years. That has to be most of your savings." I blinked at him innocently. "You needed help. We appreciate it, we really do. But Mom, you can't keep spending your nest egg on us. What happens when you run out of money? What happens when you need long-term care?" The beautiful irony of it was staggering. Marcus was lecturing me about financial responsibility, while sitting in a house I'd helped him buy, wearing clothes purchased with money I'd given him, planning a Disney vacation funded by my nest egg. "We think," Stephanie said slowly, "that maybe you need some help managing your finances, just to make sure you don't accidentally spend yourself into poverty." "I see." I kept my voice carefully neutral. "And what kind of help did you have in mind?" Marcus pulled out a folder from the coffee table. "We've been talking to a lawyer, Mom. There are legal ways to protect your assets, to make sure you don't make any decisions you might regret later." "What kind of decisions?" "Well, like giving away large sums of money when you can't afford to, or refusing necessary care because you're worried about the cost." Stephanie nodded earnestly. "We're thinking about power of attorney, Eleanor. It would let us help you with the big financial decisions. Make sure you're protected. Protected from what? From yourself, Marcus said, and for a moment his mask slipped. I saw the irritation, the impatience, the barely contained frustration of a man who thought he was dealing with a stubborn, confused old woman. I don't understand, I said. Are you saying I'm not capable of managing my own money? Mom, you just spent the last of your savings helping us with expenses we could have managed ourselves, Marcus said. That's not rational behavior. You told me you needed help. We did need help, but a rational person in your financial situation would have said no. The room fell silent. Marcus had just admitted that he'd knowingly taken money from someone he believed couldn't afford to give it. In his mind, this made me irrational, not him unethical. So what exactly are you proposing? I asked. Marcus opened the folder and pulled out legal documents. We've had papers drawn up, a conservatorship petition. It would give us legal authority to make financial and medical decisions on your behalf. You want to have me declared incompetent. We want to protect you, Stephanie said quickly. Eleanor, you're not thinking clearly about money. You're putting yourself at risk. And if I refuse? Marcus's jaw tightened. Mom, we're going to file the petition regardless. We have documentation of your recent health issues, your isolated living situation, and your pattern of irrational financial decisions. A judge will see that this is necessary. You're threatening me. We're protecting you, Marcus repeated, but his voice was harder now. Mom, you can fight this if you want, but it's going to happen. The only question is whether you make it easy or difficult. I sat there for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle. My son was essentially holding me hostage. Submit to his control willingly, or he'd use the legal system to force me into submission. I see, I said finally. And what happens to me once you have this conservatorship? You'll move to Sunrise Assisted Living, Stephanie said. It's a lovely place, Eleanor. You'll have your own room, meals provided, activities, and we'll manage your finances to make sure you have enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. How generous of you. My voice was perfectly calm, but inside I was burning with rage. Tell me, how much of my money do you think there is to manage? Marcus looked uncomfortable. Mom, we're not trying to control your money for our benefit. We're trying to make sure you don't spend it all and end up destitute. But how much do you think I have? Well, with Social Security and Dad's pension, maybe $3,000 a month, and whatever savings are left after.
So you think I'm nearly broke?
Not broke, Stephanie said quickly, but with limited resources that need to be carefully managed. I reached into my handbag and pulled out the portfolio Klaus had sent me. Before we go any further with this conservatorship discussion, I think you should see something. Marcus frowned. What is it? My actual financial situation. I handed him the leather-bound folder. Go ahead, open it. Marcus opened the portfolio, and I watched his face change as he scanned the first page. The color drained from his cheeks. His hands started to shake. What is this? My current asset statement from Helvetia Private Wealth Management in Geneva. Stephanie leaned over to look, and her sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. $6.8 million, I said conversationally. That's my current net worth, Marcus. Not counting the townhouse I just purchased in Riverside Meadows for cash. The silence in the room was deafening. The $100,000 I've given you over the past 3 years, that represents about 6 days of investment growth. I've been living modestly by choice, not necessity. Marcus was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language, the numbers on the letterhead. Stephanie was looking back and forth between the documents and my face like she was watching a tennis match. Eleanor, where did this money come from? Your father-in-law was a very smart investor. We've been wealthy for decades, Marcus. I just never saw the need to flaunt it. Marcus finally found his voice. Why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer you except love. The words hung in the air like a sword about to fall. And now I know. The aftermath of my revelation was like watching a carefully constructed building collapse in slow motion. Marcus sat frozen, the Swiss banking documents still clutched in his trembling hands, while Stephanie's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The expensive living room, furnished with my money, suddenly felt like a courtroom where the verdict had just been read. $6 million, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. You have $6 million. $6.8 million, I corrected gently, and growing daily thanks to some very astute investments your father made before he passed. Stephanie finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled squeak. Eleanor, why would you live like that if you have all this money? Live like what? Modestly? Frugally? I looked around their lavish living room, taking in the $15,000 sectional sofa, the imported Italian marble coffee table, the crystal chandelier that cost more than many people's cars. I suppose I could have lived more like this, but then I would never have learned what I needed to know about my family. Marcus was flipping through the pages of the portfolio, his businessman's mind trying to process the numbers. Mom, these accounts, some of these are from the 1990s, you've been wealthy for 30 years. Your father and I made our first significant investment in 1994. Microsoft stock, if you're curious. We bought it at $23 per share. I paused, watching his face. It split multiple times over the years. Those original shares are worth about $400 each now. But you let us struggle, Stephanie said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. You watched us worry about mortgage payments and school tuition while you were sitting on millions. The audacity of her statement took my breath away. Stephanie, dear, you weren't struggling. I have detailed financial records of your spending habits. Country club memberships, luxury car leases, expensive vacations. You were living quite comfortably on my contributions. Marcus set the portfolio down on the coffee table with shaking hands. Mom, this changes everything. The conservatorship, the assisted living, we thought you were spending yourself into poverty, so you decided to take control of my life to protect me from my own generosity. We were trying to help, he said weakly. Were you? Or were you trying to secure your inheritance while I was still alive to see it? The question hit the room like a physical blow. Stephanie's face went white, while Marcus looked like he'd been slapped. That's not we weren't, Marcus started, then stopped. Even he couldn't finish that lie. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone, accessing the audio recordings Margaret had provided. Would you like to hear what you really thought about me, what you really planned? I pressed play, and Stephanie's voice filled the room. Honestly, it's like having our own personal bank. Marcus just mentions some expense, acts all stressed about money, and she writes a check. Stephanie lunged for my phone, but I held it away from her. That's not. Where did you get that? Keep listening, I said calmly as the recording continued with Marcus's voice. Once she's in assisted living, it's not like she can leave. We'll have power of attorney, and then we can really streamline things. Marcus's face had gone from white to gray. Mom, who recorded this? I hired a private investigator after you called me a burden. Did you know that's actually a crime, Marcus? Elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy. The penalties are quite severe. Stephanie was on her feet now, pacing like a caged animal. Eleanor, you have to understand, we thought you were broke. We thought you were giving us your last dollars. We were worried about you. Worried enough to plan my institutionalization without my consent. Worried enough to have me declared incompetent so you could control my finances. I stood up slowly, my voice growing colder with each word. Tell me, Stephanie, what were you planning to do with my limited resources once you had power of attorney? We would have taken care of you, like you took care of me when I had pneumonia. The room fell silent again. Outside, I could hear the sounds of suburban evening, children playing, lawnmowers running, normal families living normal lives. Inside this house, a family was disintegrating in real time. Marcus finally spoke, his voice hollow. What do I want? I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus, 3 weeks ago, I wanted my son to check on me when I was sick. I wanted a phone call, maybe a visit, perhaps some soup or groceries. I wanted basic human decency from my only child. We're sorry about that, he said quickly. We should have been there. Yes, you should have. But instead, you called me a burden and started planning to warehouse me in an assisted living facility so you could steal what you thought were my last remaining assets. Stephanie was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. Eleanor, please, we made mistakes. We can fix this. We can make it right. Can you? Can you undo 3 years of systematic fraud? Can you give me back the trust I had in my son? Can you explain to Connor and Blake why their grandmother suddenly disappeared from their lives? At the mention of the twins, Marcus looked stricken. Mom, the boys, they don't need to know about any of this. Don't they? Don't they deserve to know what kind of parents they have? What kind of example you've been setting? I walked to the mantel where family photos were displayed, professional portraits of Marcus, Stephanie, and the twins looking like the perfect American family. Tell me, Marcus, what were you planning to tell your sons about why Grandma suddenly moved away? What story were you going to make up? We would have brought them to visit you. At the assisted living facility you chose without consulting me. How often? Once a month? Once a year? Until eventually it became too much trouble and the visits just stopped? Marcus's silence was answer enough. I picked up one of the family photos, the twins on their last birthday, grinning gap-toothed smiles at the camera. These boys are 8 years old, Marcus. In 10 years they'll be 18. What kind of men do you think they'll become if they grow up watching their father manipulate and exploit vulnerable family members? They're good kids, Stephanie said defensively. They are, but good kids can learn terrible lessons from the adults around them. What happens when they grow up and decide you're too much trouble? What happens when you're elderly and they see you as a burden? The implications of my words settled over them like a shroud. Stephanie sank back into her chair while Marcus stared at the family photos with dawning horror. Mom, he said quietly, what happens now? I gathered up the Swiss banking documents and put them back in my handbag. Now you get to live with the consequences of your choices. What does that mean? It means the gravy train has permanently left the station, Marcus. No more emergency loans, no more contributions to your mortgage, no more funding for your country club lifestyle. Stephanie's head snapped up. But you can't afford your current lifestyle without my subsidies, so you'll have to make some adjustments. What kind of adjustments? The kind adults make when they have to live within their actual means. Sell the house you can't afford, cancel the club membership you don't need, put the boys in public school, get jobs that actually pay enough to support your choices. Marcus looked panicked. Mom, you can't just cut us off completely. We have obligations, commitments you made assuming I would continue to fund them indefinitely. I headed toward the door. Here's some free advice, Marcus. When you make financial commitments based on other people's money, you're gambling with your family's future. Please, Stephanie called after me. Eleanor, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can fix our relationship. I paused at the door and turned back to look at them. My son and his wife, sitting in their expensive home, surrounded by the luxury my money had purchased, finally understanding that their elaborate plans had just crumbled to dust. Stephanie, the relationship was broken the moment you started seeing me as a resource instead of a person. The moment Marcus called me a burden while planning to spend my inheritance. Some things can't be fixed. So that's it? Marcus asked. You're just walking away from your family? I'm walking away from people who saw me as an ATM with a pulse. Whether there's still family left to salvage, well, that depends on who you choose to be going forward. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool evening air. Behind me, I could hear Stephanie's sobs and Marcus's frantic whispers, but I didn't look back. As I drove home, I realized that for the first time in 3 years, I felt genuinely free. The weight of pretending, of hoping, of believing that love could overcome greed, all of it was gone. Marcus and Stephanie now knew the truth about my wealth, but more importantly, I knew the truth about their character, and that truth was going to change everything. The next 3 days passed in a surreal quiet that felt like the calm before a hurricane. I went about my daily routine in my new townhouse, unpacking the last of my belongings and arranging my genuine antiques and art pieces where they belonged. For the first time in decades, I wasn't hiding my wealth or pretending to be someone I wasn't. The Ming vase now sat prominently on my mantelpiece. The Monet study hung in my living room where the light caught it perfectly. My Cartier watch, a gift from Victor on our 30th anniversary, graced my wrist without shame. I was done performing poverty, but the silence from Marcus was deafening. No phone calls, no text messages, no desperate attempts to apologize or negotiate. Part of me had expected him to come crawling back immediately, but Margaret had warned me this might happen. People like Marcus and Stephanie, she'd said during our phone call Thursday morning, they don't give up easily when this much money is involved. They're probably regrouping, consulting lawyers, trying to find another angle. She was right. Friday afternoon, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase, clearly a lawyer. Behind him stood Marcus, looking haggard and desperate. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. Yes. Mrs. Blackwell, I'm attorney Robert Hartwell from Hartwell & Associates. I represent your son Marcus. Could we have a moment of your time? I suppose. Though I should mention that all conversations are being recorded for my own protection. Hartwell's eyebrows rose slightly, but he maintained his professional demeanor. Mrs. Blackwell, there seems to be some confusion about your financial situation and some concerning changes in your behavior that your family has brought to my attention. Concerning changes? Marcus finally spoke up, his voice strained. Mom, this whole thing with the private investigator, the recordings, the threats about cutting us off financially, it's not like you. We think someone might be influencing you. I almost laughed. Influencing me to do what, Marcus? Discover that my son has been defrauding me for years. Attorney Hartwell stepped forward. Mrs. Blackwell, your son is concerned that you may be the victim of what's called undue influence. Perhaps someone has convinced you that your family has wronged you in order to isolate you and gain access to your assets. You mean like Klaus Richter, my Swiss banker, the one I've been working with for over 20 years? Or perhaps this private investigator you hired, Hartwell continued smoothly. These individuals often prey on elderly clients, convincing them that their families are plotting against them. The audacity was breathtaking. They were actually trying to flip the script, painting me as the victim of manipulation while positioning themselves as my protectors. I see, I said calmly. And what exactly are you proposing? Marcus looked hopeful. Mom, we want to help you. We think you should have a psychological evaluation, just to make sure you're thinking clearly, and maybe we should review these financial documents with an independent accountant. You want to have me declared mentally incompetent. We want to make sure you're protected, Hartwell said carefully. Mrs. Blackwell, the sudden appearance of millions of dollars, the paranoid behavior, the hiring of investigators to spy on family members, these are red flags that concerned family members can't ignore. I stepped back and fully opened my door. Gentlemen, please come in. I have something to show you. They followed me into my living room and I watched their faces as they took in the surroundings. Gone was the modest apartment decor they expected. Instead, they saw museum-quality art, furniture that belonged in architectural magazines, and the unmistakable trappings of serious wealth. Hartwell's professional composure cracked slightly. Mrs. Blackwell, this is quite impressive. The Monet study is worth about $300,000, I said conversationally. The Ming vase is approximately $180,000. The Persian rug you're standing on cost more than most people's cars. Marcus was staring around the room like he'd walked into an alternate universe. Mom, where did all this come from? The same place the money came from, Marcus. Your father and I collected these pieces over 30 years. I've just stopped hiding them. I gestured for them to sit, then pulled out a thick folder from my coffee table. Since you're concerned about my mental state, let me show you exactly how clear my thinking has been. I opened the folder to reveal comprehensive financial records going back 5 years. Every dollar I gave you is documented here. The $50,000 for your house down payment. Here's the bank transfer. The $30,000 for Stephanie's kitchen remodel. Here's the check. The $18,000 for the twins' school expenses last year. Documented. Hartwell leaned forward to examine the records, his expression growing more serious with each page. Total amount given to Marcus and Stephanie over 5 years, $127,000. That's documented. Attorney Hartwell. Now here are the records of their actual spending during that same period. I produced Margaret's investigation files. Country club memberships they claimed they couldn't afford. $17,500 over 5 years. Luxury vacations they said were once-in-a-lifetime splurges. $73,000. Car leases for vehicles well beyond their stated income level. $38,000. Marcus was growing paler with each revelation. Mom, how did you— Finally, he looked up at Marcus with the expression of a man who'd just discovered his client had lied to him. Mr. Blackwell, these recordings suggest you and your wife deliberately misrepresented your financial need to your mother while simultaneously planning to have her declared incompetent. It's not what it sounds like, Marcus said desperately. We really thought she was spending herself into poverty. We were trying to protect her. By lying to her about your true financial situation? By planning to institutionalize her without her consent. Hartwell's professional mask was slipping. Mr. Blackwell, what you've described to me isn't elder protection, it's elder abuse. I leaned back in my chair, watching the confrontation unfold. Attorney Hartwell, I'm curious about something. When my son hired you to question my mental competency, did he mention that he thought I was nearly broke? Hartwell nodded slowly. He said you were living on a fixed income and had been giving away money you couldn't afford to lose. And what was your legal strategy based on that information? To demonstrate that you were being taken advantage of financially and needed protection through conservatorship. I see. And now that you know I'm worth nearly $7 million and my son has been systematically defrauding me for years, how does that change your legal opinion? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Hartwell closed his briefcase with a sharp click and stood up. Mr. Blackwell, I'm withdrawing from this case effective immediately. My advice to you is to consult with a criminal defense attorney, because what your mother has documented here could result in felony charges. Marcus jumped to his feet. Wait, you can't just leave. She's my mother. We can work this out as a family. Blackwell, your mother isn't the one who needs legal protection here. You are. Hartwell headed for the door, then paused. Mrs. Blackwell, you might want to consider filing a police report. What your son has done constitutes multiple felonies under state elder abuse statutes. After they left, I sat in my beautiful living room surrounded by my genuine treasures, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. Marcus's plan had just collapsed so completely that even his lawyer had abandoned him. But I wasn't done yet. I picked up my phone and dialed Margaret Holmes. Margaret, I need you to document everything that just happened. I want a complete record of their attempt to have me declared incompetent even after discovering my true financial situation. Absolutely. Mrs. Blackwell, are you ready for the next phase? I looked around my townhouse, at the life I was finally living authentically, without pretense or shame about my success. Yes, I said, it's time for the final act. The game was almost over, and I was about to deliver checkmate. The following Monday morning, I made a decision that would change everything permanently. I called Klaus Richter in Geneva and instructed him to transfer another $2 million to my domestic accounts, not because I needed it, but because I wanted the financial firepower readily available for what came next. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly. Word travels fast in small financial circles, and suddenly everyone wanted to know about Eleanor Blackwell, the mysterious millionaire who'd been hiding in plain sight in Millfield Heights. The first call came from Jonathan Pierce, president of First National Bank of Crescent City. Mrs. Blackwell, I hope you don't mind me calling personally. We've noticed some significant activity in your accounts, and I wanted to ensure you're receiving the level of service appropriate for a client of your caliber. Translation: We just realized you're incredibly wealthy, and we want your business. Mr. Pierce, I appreciate your attention. Actually, I've been considering consolidating my domestic holdings. Perhaps we should meet. Within an hour, I was sitting in the bank president's private office, being offered investment services, private banking privileges, and the kind of fawning attention that comes with seven-figure account balances. But my real purpose wasn't banking, it was intelligence gathering. Mr. Pierce, I'm curious about something. If someone were to default on a mortgage with your bank, what's the typical process? Well, we always try to work with borrowers first, payment plans, refinancing options, but if someone is truly unable to meet their obligations, he shrugged diplomatically. How long does foreclosure typically take? In this state, about 4 to 6 months from the first missed payment to auction. I nodded thoughtfully, and if someone wanted to pay off another person's mortgage, say as a gift or family assistance, would that be possible? Certainly. We see that occasionally. Usually parents helping adult children or successful siblings helping family members. What if someone wanted to buy a mortgage from the bank directly, take over the loan completely? Pierce looked puzzled. That's unusual, but legally possible. After leaving the bank, I drove to Marcus's office at Pinnacle Industries. I hadn't been there since Victor's funeral 5 years ago, when Marcus had been promoted and wanted to show us his corner office. Back then, I'd been proud of his success. Now I was curious about something else entirely. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly manicured nails and a practiced smile, looked up as I approached. Good afternoon, how can I help you? I'm here to see Marcus Blackwell. I'm his mother, Eleanor. Her expression shifted to something approaching sympathy. Oh, Mrs. Blackwell, I'm sorry, but Mr. Blackwell is in meetings all afternoon. Would you like to schedule an appointment? Actually, I'd like to speak with his supervisor, Mr. Davidson, isn't it? She looked uncertain. Mr. Davidson is very busy. I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a check for $50,000 to the Pinnacle Industries Children's Charity Fund, an organization I'd researched that morning. Please give this to Mr. Davidson with my compliments and let him know that Marcus Blackwell's mother would appreciate a brief conversation. 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from Richard Davidson, Regional Vice President, in his executive office. He was a man in his 50s with the kind of political smile that came from years of managing difficult personalities and delicate situations. Mrs. Blackwell, this donation is incredibly generous. Our children's charity will make excellent use of these funds. I'm glad to help, Mr. Davidson. I'm here because I'm concerned about my son's well-being. He's been under tremendous stress lately, and I'm wondering if it's affecting his work performance. Davidson's expression became carefully neutral. Mrs. Blackwell, I can't discuss employee performance issues even with family members. Of course not, but I can share my concerns as a parent. I leaned forward slightly. Marcus has been making some very poor decisions lately, financial decisions that suggest he's not thinking clearly. I'm worried that this stress might be affecting his judgment in other areas as well. What kind of poor decisions? He recently attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could control my finances. When that failed, he tried to convince a lawyer that I was being manipulated by financial advisors. I paused. The irony is that I'm worth nearly $7 million, and he was trying to protect me from my own wealth. Davidson's eyebrows rose sharply. $7 million? I've been living modestly by choice, Mr. Davidson. My son assumed I was broke and has been taking advantage of what he thought was my limited income. When I revealed the truth about my finances, instead of apologizing, he doubled down and tried to have me institutionalized. Mrs. Blackwell, why are you telling me this? Because Pinnacle Industries has a reputation for employing people of character. I'm concerned that my son's recent behavior, attempting to defraud an elderly family member, filing false legal documents, conspiring to commit elder abuse, might not align with your company's values. The room fell silent. Davidson steepled his fingers and stared at me for a long moment. Mrs. Blackwell, are you asking me to take action against your son? I'm asking you to be aware of the situation. Marcus is facing significant financial pressure because I've cut off the subsidies he'd become dependent on. People under that kind of stress sometimes make desperate choices. What kind of choices? The kind that might involve workplace misconduct, unethical behavior, or actions that could expose the company to liability. I stood up. I hope it doesn't come to that, Mr. Davidson, but I thought you should know what kind of pressure your employee is under. As I left Pinnacle Industries, I reflected on how information was its own form of power. I hadn't asked Davidson to fire Marcus. I hadn't made specific accusations about workplace behavior. I'd simply planted a seed of awareness that would grow over time. My next stop was Riverside Meadows Elementary School. I'd made an appointment with the principal, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, ostensibly to discuss volunteer opportunities. In reality, I wanted to understand the twins' situation better. Mrs. Blackwell, it's wonderful to meet Connor and Blake's grandmother. They're delightful boys, very bright and engaged. I'm so glad to hear that. I haven't been as involved in their lives as I'd like to be. True enough, I was hoping to change that, perhaps through volunteering here at school. We always welcome family volunteers. What kind of activities interest you? I was thinking about educational enrichment. I have some resources that might benefit the school. I handed her a check for $25,000 made out to Riverside Meadows Elementary School. For whatever programs need funding. Dr. Mitchell's eyes widened. Mrs. Blackwell, this is extraordinary. We could fund our entire arts program for 2 years with this. I'm happy to help. Dr. Mitchell, I should mention that Connor and Blake's family situation might be changing soon. Their parents are facing some financial difficulties. Oh no, I wanted you to be aware in case the boys seem stressed or their parents become difficult about school expenses. What kind of difficulties? Marcus and Stephanie have been living beyond their means for several years. That situation is being corrected, but the adjustment period might be challenging for everyone involved. Dr. Mitchell nodded with understanding. We see this sometimes, unfortunately. Families who overextend themselves financially and then have to make difficult changes. The children often struggle with the transition. Exactly. I wanted to make sure the school was prepared to support Connor and Blake if needed. As I drove home that evening, I realized I'd accomplished something important. I'd created a network of awareness around Marcus and Stephanie's situation. Their banker knew they were at risk for foreclosure. Marcus's boss knew he was under investigation for elder abuse. The twins' school knew their family was facing financial crisis. I hadn't destroyed them, yet, but I'd laid the groundwork for their destruction to be swift and complete when they inevitably made their next desperate move. That night, as I sat in my beautifully appointed living room, I received a text message from an unknown number. We know what you're doing. This isn't over. You'll regret destroying your own family. I smiled and forwarded the message to Margaret Holmes with a note. Document this threat for the file. Marcus was getting desperate. Desperate people made mistakes, and I would be ready when he made his. The inevitable explosion came exactly 1 week later, and it was even more spectacular than I'd anticipated. I was in my kitchen Wednesday morning, enjoying my coffee while reading the Crescent City Herald's business section, when my phone started buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. The first voicemail was from a reporter at Channel 7 News. "Mrs. Blackwell, this is Jessica Chen from Channel 7. We'd like to get your comment on the allegations your son has made about elder abuse and financial exploitation. Could you call us back?" The second call was from the Crescent City Herald. The third was from a local radio station. By the time I'd counted 12 missed calls from various media outlets, I realized that Marcus had done something monumentally stupid. I called Margaret Holmes immediately. "Margaret, what's happening? I have reporters calling me about elder abuse allegations." "Mrs. Blackwell, your son held a press conference this morning. He's claiming you're the victim of a massive financial scam and that he's trying to save you from criminals who've isolated you from your family." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. He went public. "Oh, it gets better. He's claiming that the private investigator you hired has been feeding you false information about your family to turn you against them. He says the Swiss bank accounts are fraudulent, that someone is using fake documents to convince you you're wealthy when you're actually being robbed." The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. Marcus had taken every truth about the situation and twisted it into a lie so complete that it bordered on performance art. What exactly did he say? He painted himself as a devoted son trying to protect his elderly mother from sophisticated financial predators. He claimed you've become paranoid and hostile because these criminals have convinced you that your loving family is plotting against you. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Margaret, please tell me you have everything documented." "Every single thing." "Mrs. Blackwell, he's made a fatal mistake. By going public with these claims, he's opened himself up to defamation charges. More importantly, he's forced you to defend yourself publicly, which means all the evidence we've gathered can now be presented in open court." "What do you mean?" "He's essentially sued you in the court of public opinion. Now you get to respond with facts." An hour later, I was sitting in the offices of Crawford & Associates, the most prestigious law firm in Crescent City. Attorney Rebecca Crawford was a formidable woman in her 50s who specialized in high-stakes litigation and had a reputation for destroying opponents who underestimated her. "Mrs. Blackwell, I've reviewed the evidence your investigator provided. Your son has made a serious mistake by making these allegations publicly. We can not only defend you, but we can go on the offensive." "What are my options?" "Multiple avenues. Civil suits for defamation, elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. We can also pursue criminal charges. But first we need to counter his narrative immediately." "How?" Rebecca smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted wounded prey. "By telling the truth. Loudly, publicly, and with documentation that will make him wish he'd never opened his mouth." That afternoon, I found myself standing in front of a podium at the Crescent City Press Club, facing a room full of reporters and cameras. Rebecca stood beside me, along with Klaus Richter, who'd flown in from Geneva that morning with original banking documents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rebecca began, "my client, Mrs. Eleanor Blackwell, is here to respond to the serious allegations made by her son this morning. What you're about to hear is a story of systematic elder abuse, fraud, and a desperate attempt to cover up criminal behavior." She handed me the microphone, and I looked out at the sea of expectant faces. 3 months ago, I'd been lying in a hospital bed, alone and dismissed as a burden. Today I was about to destroy the narrative my son had spent years carefully constructing. "My name is Eleanor Blackwell, and I am 72 years old. This morning, my son Marcus claimed that I am the victim of financial exploitation. He's correct, but not in the way he thinks." I gestured to Klaus, who stepped forward with his leather portfolio. Mr. Klaus Richter is a senior partner at Helvetia Private Wealth Management in Geneva, Switzerland. He has flown here today to present documentation of my actual financial status, which my son claims is fraudulent. Klaus opened his portfolio and held up the official documents. "Mrs. Blackwell has been a client of our firm for 27 years. Her current liquid assets total $6.8 million, with additional holdings bringing her net worth to approximately $9.2 million. A murmur ran through the room. Rebecca took over again. For the past 5 years, Mrs. Blackwell's son and daughter-in-law have systematically defrauded her of over $127,000 by claiming financial hardship while actually living a luxury lifestyle. When Mrs. Blackwell became ill with pneumonia, instead of caring for her, her son called her a burden and began planning to have her declared incompetent so he could control her finances. She held up transcripts of the recorded conversations. We have audio recordings of Marcus and Stephanie Blackwell discussing their plans to institutionalize Mrs. Blackwell against her will and assume control of what they believed were her limited assets. The room erupted in questions, but Rebecca held up her hand for silence. This morning, faced with the exposure of his criminal behavior, Marcus Blackwell chose to attack his victim rather than accept responsibility. He has defamed his mother publicly, accused innocent professionals of crimes they didn't commit, and attempted to manipulate public sympathy to cover up his own wrongdoing. I stepped back to the microphone. I want to be very clear about something. I love my son. I raised him to be a good man, and for most of his life he was, but somewhere along the way he began to see me as a resource rather than a person. When I needed him most, he abandoned me. When I discovered his deception, he tried to have me declared incompetent, and when that failed, he chose to publicly attack my character rather than face the consequences of his actions. I paused, looking directly into the cameras. I am not a victim of financial exploitation. I am a victim of family betrayal, but I am also a woman with substantial resources and the determination to seek justice. The questions came fast and furious after that. Reporters wanted to know about the Swiss accounts, the private investigator, the recordings, the legal implications. Rebecca fielded most of them, but I answered the personal ones myself. Mrs. Blackwell, how does it feel to have your son attack you publicly like this? It feels like the final death of the relationship I thought we had. Marcus isn't fighting for me anymore, he's fighting against me. That tells me everything I need to know about who he really is. What do you want to happen to your son? I considered the question carefully. I want him to face the consequences of his choices. I want justice, and I want other elderly people to know that they don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from family. Will you be pressing charges? Absolutely. Criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. Civil suits for defamation and financial damages. My son chose to make this a public fight. I intend to finish it. As we left the press club, Rebecca was practically glowing with satisfaction. Mrs. Blackwell, that was masterful. By tomorrow morning, Marcus will be the most hated man in Crescent City. Will it stick? Can he wriggle out of this somehow? With the evidence we have? No chance. He's committed multiple felonies, and now he's added defamation to the list. His lawyer will advise him to plea bargain, assuming he can find a lawyer willing to take the case. That evening, I sat in my living room watching the news coverage of the day's events. Channel 7 led with the story, "Local son attempts to defraud millionaire mother, then lies about it." The Herald's online edition had already posted the full story with the headline, "The $7 million Deception, How One Family's Greed Led to Public Disgrace." My phone had been ringing all evening, friends I hadn't heard from in years, neighbors wanting to express support, and even some distant relatives reaching out, but there were no calls from Marcus or Stephanie. Around 9 p.m., Margaret called with an update. "Mrs. Blackwell, Marcus and Stephanie have lawyered up with criminal defense attorneys. Word is they're looking at potential federal charges now, since the fraud involves interstate banking transactions. And the boys? Stephanie's parents drove down from Portland. They picked up Connor and Blake this afternoon. It looks like they're taking temporary custody while this plays out." I felt a pang of sadness for my grandsons. They were innocent victims in all of this, about to learn that their father was not the man they thought he was, but they were also young enough to recover, to learn better lessons, to grow up understanding that actions have consequences and that integrity matters more than money. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized that the war was essentially over. Marcus had made his desperate gambit and lost everything. His reputation, his job prospects, his freedom, and most importantly, his children's respect. Tomorrow would bring the final phase, watching him face the full consequences of trying to destroy the woman who gave him life. Justice, it turned out, was worth the wait. The final reckoning came faster than even Rebecca Crawford had predicted. Within 48 hours of my press conference, Marcus's carefully constructed world collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Thursday morning brought the first wave of consequences. Richard Davidson from Pinnacle Industries called me personally at 7 a.m. "Mrs. Blackwell, I wanted to inform you directly that we've terminated Marcus's employment effective immediately. The company cannot be associated with someone facing elder abuse charges, and frankly, the media attention was becoming a liability. I understand, Mr. Davidson. Thank you for calling. Mrs. Blackwell, I also wanted to apologize. If we'd known what was happening to you, we would have acted sooner. No one should have to endure what your son put you through. By noon, the foreclosure notice had been posted on Marcus and Stephanie's front door. First National Bank, apparently eager to distance themselves from the scandal, had accelerated the process, citing material changes in the borrower's circumstances. The house I'd helped them buy would be auctioned within 60 days. But the most devastating blow came Thursday afternoon, when Child Protective Services arrived at the house with a court order. A concerned citizen, I suspected it was Dr. Mitchell from the twins' school, had reported that Connor and Blake were living in an unstable environment with parents facing serious criminal charges. I watched from my living room window as the social worker spoke with Stephanie on the front porch. Even from a distance, I could see her becoming increasingly agitated, her gestures growing more frantic as the reality of her situation sank in. The boys were already with their maternal grandparents in Portland, but now it was official. They would remain there pending the outcome of the criminal proceedings. Friday brought the criminal charges. Rebecca called me with the news at 8 a.m. Mrs. Blackwell, the district attorney has filed formal charges. Marcus is facing 3 counts of elder abuse, 5 counts of fraud, and 2 counts of conspiracy. Stephanie is facing similar charges as a co-conspirator. The federal prosecutor is also considering charges related to the interstate banking fraud. What kind of sentences are we looking at? If convicted on all counts, Marcus could face 15 to 20 years. Stephanie, as a first-time offender who can claim she was following his lead, might get 8 to 12 years. I felt a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction that justice was being served, but also profound sadness that it had come to this. There's more, Rebecca continued. Their criminal defense attorney called my office this morning. They want to meet about a possible plea agreement. What kind of plea? Full restitution, public apology, and guilty pleas to reduce charges. They're hoping to avoid prison time in exchange for admitting everything and accepting responsibility. I considered this for a moment. Rebecca, what would you recommend? Honestly, I think we should hear them out. Not because they deserve mercy, but because a public confession and full restitution might serve your interests better than a lengthy trial. Saturday afternoon, I found myself in the conference room at Crawford & Associates, sitting across from the 2 people who had once been the most important family I had left. Marcus looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. His expensive suits had been replaced by a rumpled shirt and khakis. His hair was unwashed, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands shook slightly as he reached for his water glass. Stephanie looked even worse. She'd lost weight, her carefully maintained appearance replaced by the hollow look of someone who'd realized their entire life was built on lies. Their attorney, a weary-looking public defender named Tom Morris, spoke first. Mrs. Blackwell, my clients want to make this right. They understand the gravity of what they've done, and they're prepared to accept full responsibility. Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I looked at him across the table, this man who had once been my little boy, who I'd raised with such hopes and dreams. Are you sorry you did it, Marcus? Or sorry you got caught? He flinched as if I'd slapped him. I'm sorry I did it. I'm sorry I became someone who could treat you like that. I'm sorry I destroyed our family. What about calling me a burden? What about trying to have me declared incompetent? What about the press conference where you painted me as a confused old woman being manipulated by criminals? Tears started running down his cheeks. I was desperate. When you revealed the money, when I realized how wrong I'd been about everything, I thought if I could convince people that you were being scammed, maybe I could undo it all somehow. Stephanie spoke for the first time. Eleanor, we never meant for it to go this far. At first, we really did think you were struggling financially. We thought we were helping by accepting your gifts. When did you realize I wasn't struggling? She looked down at her hands. Honestly, when Marcus found your bank statements last year while looking for insurance documents when you were sick, we saw the account balances, but we told ourselves it must be some kind of mistake. So you knew I was wealthy, but you continued to take money under false pretenses. Yes, her voice was barely audible. Marcus looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Mom, what can we do? How can we make this right? I leaned back in my chair, studying their faces. These were broken people who had finally hit bottom, who had lost everything that mattered to them through their own greed and stupidity. Full restitution, I said finally. Every penny you took from me plus interest. Public confession detailing exactly what you did. Guilty pleas to the criminal charges, and you stay away from me for the rest of my life. Mom, please, Marcus started, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. You will also establish a trust fund for Connor and Blake's education and future needs. You will attend financial counseling and therapy. And you will never ever contact me again, unless it's through lawyers. What about the boys? Stephanie asked desperately. They're our children. They're children who deserve better than parents who lie, cheat, and steal from elderly family members. They're better off with people who can teach them about integrity and character. The negotiation took 3 hours. In the end, Marcus and Stephanie agreed to everything. Full restitution of $127,000 in damages. Public apologies to be published in the Crescent City Herald. Guilty pleas to reduce charges that would result in probation instead of prison time, contingent on completion of community service and therapy programs. Most importantly, they agreed to a permanent restraining order that would keep them from contacting me ever again. As I left the law office that evening, Rebecca walked me to my car. Mrs. Blackwell, how do you feel? Are you satisfied with the outcome? I considered her question carefully. Rebecca, I don't feel satisfaction. I don't feel vindicated. I feel free. For the first time in years, I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. I don't have to hide my success or minimize my achievements. I don't have to worry about being used or manipulated or dismissed as a burden. I looked back at the law office where Marcus and Stephanie were still inside with their attorney, signing papers that would formally end our family relationship forever. I raised a son who became a stranger. I loved a family that saw me as a resource. But I'm still here. I'm still strong, and I'm finally free to live my life on my own terms. Rebecca smiled. What will you do now? I thought about Klaus Richter's latest call about charitable giving opportunities. I thought about Connor and Blake, growing up with grandparents who would teach them better values. I thought about my beautiful townhouse, my genuine artwork, my authentic life finally lived without pretense. I'm going to do what I should have done years ago, I said. I'm going to stop hiding and start living. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Crescent City, I realized that Marcus had been right about one thing. I had been a burden. I'd been a burden to his conscience, a burden to his greed, and a burden to his plans to live beyond his means on someone else's money. But I was nobody's burden anymore. I was Eleanor Blackwell, millionaire, survivor, and finally, truly free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.